here. If you believe in productions and events like this, please consider becoming a member if you're not a member already, and please renew if you are. Donations are the best way to help support us for the next 99 years that we'll be here. We are very happy. I'm enthralled to be able to present to you Dr. John Bratton. He is the professor and chair of the anthropology department at the University of West Florida. Get that right?
Correct.
Get tongue-tied there. He has been paramount in helping us go through the process of documenting our Cuban Chug exhibit, on the architecture of it, how they were created, as well as partnering with Dr. Corey Compartita, who is doing more of the cultural aspect of it, our partnership with Cuba and everything. And the whole line and scope and logic is with his help, we're going to be able to find the funding we need to make this a really 20th century exhibit. Not only showing the ingenuity of survival, of what the Cubans have to do to get out of there, but also that cultural significance. And I think in many cases, personally, I think Americans just take for granted. But when you look at these vessels and realize this was someone's idea of their best opportunity of survival, it's a whole different story. So I'd like to introduce Dr. John. I want to thank you.
Thanks so much. This is a really fun project to be able to come down to Key West. And so I teach at the University of West Florida, as Misha said, the University of West Florida in Pensacola. And so it's still Florida, but it's quite a bit different from this Florida. And every time I take off on one of these trips to research things like this, so my wife and daughter, they like to come with me, this one in particular. But so the title of my talk, Ballast and Timbers Beneath the Sand, Exploration, Analysis, Conservation, Shipwrecks. Well, that's not really what I came here to talk to you about. I came to talk to you about the Cuban Chugs, which are right here, right out the door here, you see them. And so I guess it was really 3 years ago, or maybe longer than that, thinking about COVID now, when I was first found anyways, luckily, to really see if I might be able to help with this project some way. And, this is my third trip down here. But a little bit about what I do and why I was brought into this project was I came to Florida in 1994 to work on shipwrecks, some of the oldest shipwrecks in the New World, actually. And so I train students, and I've been doing this for 26 years now. So I'm getting a little old, but I can still manage to get out, and I have a young family, so that makes me want to stay active. But anyways, we search for shipwrecks. We don't always have vessels at hand quite like this in such a lovely place. And so this is one of the ships that we worked on called Catherine. And this was a lumber ship that came to Pensacola in 1894 and wrecked in a winter storm. And of course, pictures don't always tell the truth sometimes. This is a staged photograph. This was taken the next day when the life-saving crew came back to take this picture. But the rescue actually happened the day before, and it was by the captain of the life-saving station. He lived on Santa Rosa Island, and the islands out there. And he had 2 daughters, which the New Orleans Times-Picayune described as buxom girls. Anyways, they helped him drag what's called a Lyle gun down the beach. They shot with a small cannon a rope to the ship, caught one of the masts, and they used what's known as breeches buoy, which is the sailors, there were 17 on board, stepped into basically a pair of pants that slid down the rope to shore, and the entire crew was saved. But then these guys get the hero shot. But we worked on that one. And then sometimes people will come and tell us about shipwrecks and things we found. And they said, do you know about the steamship in the Blackwater River? We said, no. And they said, yeah, all you gotta do is go over there and then you'll see it sticking out of the water. Well, we don't always know. Sometimes people tell us about things that may not be the real thing. Here you go. This is the paddle wheel, the starboard paddle wheel. It had wooden spokes coming up for the blades, paddle blades themselves. But this is an entire small steamer right there on the bank of the river. It sank at its moorings. We went down into this one and along the deck to the hatch to the engine room and went down with flashlights because it's pretty murky. But inside the engine room, they put linoleum down on the floor, and the linoleum was coming up in a few places. And maybe to insulate a little bit better, underneath the linoleum were newspapers. We could read the newspapers underwater, and they were from New York City. And one of them was talking about the Stanley and Livingston expedition and such. Quite fun. And then you have storms, tropical storms, hurricanes. We have tropical storms and hurricanes. You guys get hit first and then come up and hit us and panhandle. And then after every storm, something's usually uncovered. And sometimes we see the same shipwreck several times. It'll be uncovered and buried. And someone will find it. Yeah, we know about that one. But a good example. And then we do a lot of survey looking for ships. We have a great history, as you do here in Key West as well. And so this particular ship was real exciting. This is in Pensacola Sound. It's in 17 feet of water, but it's built out of mahogany. And that's a New World timber. And so this was a ship built in the New World, but it came from Mexico, and through a lot of hard work and effort, and looking at historical documents, we identified the ship as, pardon my Spanish, the Nuestra Señora de Rosario de Santiago Paso. We call it Rosario for short, but it sank in 1705.
17?
Yeah, I'm gonna get older. Okay, this is that same ship now. And so, so we work underwater, and we use scuba tanks, and we use what's called a water induction dredge. It's much like a vacuum cleaner to suck up the sand and the sediments and everything. And with that, we clear off the timbers. We record them by photography and by drawing by hand. We don't raise any of our shipwrecks. That's so expensive to do. But we document them really well. We want to look at the ship construction techniques. We want to know the history behind it, and all these things are important, and also the artifacts that come with them. And that's kind of my real interest. Is I work with a colleague. He's really interested in the actual ship construction. I'm more interested in artifacts because artifacts tell us about the people, and that's the kind of stories I like. But this is 1559. This is a shipwreck called Emmanuel Point 1, which suggests there might be more than one. Well, there are. Okay, so you may not be familiar with this story, but in 1559, the Spanish came to Pensacola with 12 ships to start a colony. They were already sending back gold and silver from Mexico and starting to look at resources in South America. And to protect those treasure ships, they were worried that the French or the English might build a port in Florida here. They called it La Florida. And so to beat them to that, a former conquistador named Don Tristan de Luna y Arellano was tasked with starting a colony in what we call Pensacola today, and then build an overland road to what we call South Carolina today. This was a major project. And build another place over there called Santa Elena. And then, but the problem was, 5 weeks after they landed with these 12 ships, or anchored in the bay anyways, there was probably a Category 5 hurricane. 7 of those ships were destroyed. Okay. In a former life, I used to be a high school science teacher, so I've had a lot of chemistry and biology and physics and things like that. But then, on a whim, almost, I went to school at Texas A&M University in a nautical archaeology program, and because of my science background, I was employed in the conservation lab to take care of artifacts from shipwrecks. And so while I was working on my PhD at Texas, this shipwreck was discovered in Florida. And so they coerced me to fly to Florida. First time I ever been to Florida. Said, do you want to work on this? And I said, yes. So I've been in Florida since 1994. That's when I arrived here. But this is a beautiful wreck that's protected the bottom of it anyways underneath the stone ballast. And so the stone ballast is there, to weight the ship to counteract the torque of the tall mast and sails. That triggerfish has been on every shipwreck I've ever worked on. I wouldn't have been surprised if I would have found him out here with his Cuban Chugs. He seems to follow me around. But just a couple examples. This is Aztec. And so this expedition, there were 1,500 colonists, included women and children. It included black slaves from Africa. But they recruited 200 Aztec warriors to accompany them on this voyage to beef up the military presence. Because they didn't know, if the Native Americans were going to be friendly or not. But we find, traces that show tied to the Aztec peoples as well. And then this thing here is copper, and it's about yay tall. We call it the Admiral's coffee cup, like one of these non-typical coffee cups. But it's a jug, and that was made out of copper and washed on the inside with tin. They could do that in 1559 because they knew that if you drank and cooked out of things that are pure copper, your food would taste funny. So they knew how to do what's called a wash with tin. But that's what it survives like to this day. We have the documents that talk about all this, and of course, this is written in Old Spanish, but I have another colleague at school, that's his expertise, is he can read the Old Spanish and we tie in the records to what we actually find underwater or on land, archaeology. And so we get both sides of the story that way. We get the real things, and we get what they wrote, which is usually written by the victors. And, sometimes that story is not exactly correct. But I love this one because it has Luna's signature at the bottom. This is his report that he sent back to Mexico saying, well, we landed, but there's a hurricane, now we need help. But it says Don Tristan de Luna y Arellano. So thousands of artifacts, and so with the help of students and volunteers, I built a lab in Pensacola, dedicated to treating all the things that we find on the ship, from this wonderful copper cooking cauldron. We found armor, this breastplate, off the stern of the ship, and brought it up. And you can see this was originally, made out of steel, but when iron or steel is placed underwater, it'll begin to rust. And when it rusts, it actually rusts 10 times faster underwater than it does in air, because there's a lot of oxygen dissolved in the water. It does this corrosion process where it changes the pH of the water. It's an electrochemical reaction. It causes the minerals in seawater to fall out of solution. They build up like concrete around these objects. But then after 450 years, there's a species of bacteria, an anaerobic bacteria, that converts the iron into iron sulfide, and it's kind of mush. But you can do casting and make replicas of the real ones.
Wow.
That's not mine. I'm going to show you mine. But this is a replica that we made. We took this to a hospital in Pensacola, and we had it CAT scanned. Based on the CAT scan images, we were able to work with the keeper of armor for the Tower of London. He said our armor was probably made about 1510. It was probably made in Italy. It was sized large, and it was for a foot soldier as opposed to a soldier who would be mounted on a horse. Well, I had another student of mine, although he's not much younger than me, but he was really good at making jewelry and things like that. So he wanted to take the original one and work with it. And so he's taken infinitely small pieces of epoxy that we cast in that shell to put back together. And so he reconstructed the original. And so we were featured in Archaeology magazine for this discovery. And then recently I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have a very large arms and armor collection, and was able to do comparisons to that to really help further identify the piece that we have. And there's the beautiful Aztec ware I showed you earlier. This was found in the bilge of the ship, all the way down to the bottom. Okay, and so it's the characteristic shape of a 16th century galleon. Okay, it has a stern castle, fore castle, what's known as the beak or the beakhead. These are the intriguing things. What is it for? There were children on board. Was it a child's play toy? or maybe one of the carpenters building the ship on his lunch break whittled the ship they were building. But this is made out of a softwood fir, and so wooden things like this, over time, they'll lose some of their internal cellular components. And it's filled with water. The outer cell wall keeps its shape. But if you just let that dry out, those cells collapse, and you get terrible shrinkage and distortion. So we have to figure out a way to remove the water, but replace it with something to keep it from collapsing. And so we use things like polyethylene glycol, it's a wax, fill it up, and then we place it in freeze dryers to remove the water. By freeze drying, it's much safer just letting it air dry. Of course, you recognize these. These are olive pits. Okay. So we find something like this, and so my boss at the time said, what can we learn from these olive pits? So I went down to the grocery store because I really like olives, and I bought a can of black olives by Vlasic, like Vlasic Pickle. So I called the Vlasic Pickle Company on the phone, just out of the blue, and said, I'm an archaeologist and working in Florida on a 16th century shipwreck. Do you have someone I can talk to about olives? And they said, well, we're actually owned by Campbell's Soup. You need to call Campbell's Soup. So, okay. So there's an 800 number for all these places. I called Campbell's Soup, and then, you explain the story over again, and they transferred me. They said, we want to talk to the California Olive Growers Association, to a man named John Daniels. So I called John Daniels, and he said, are they in good shape? I said, yeah. He says, put them on a photocopier with a ruler. Make a photocopy and fax it to me. Within an hour, he had sent me back a report that said, you have two kinds of olives. You have what's known as the mission olive, so named because Spanish missionaries brought it to the New World. And you also have one known as the Sevillano, or the Queen olive. He said one was grown for its high olive oil content, and the other one was grown because it's a very meaty olive for eating. And I said, would these have been grown in Mexico in 1559? He said, nope. They would have been brought here from Spain, probably from Seville, Spain. So, unlike treasure hunters, you've had some treasure hunters down here in Florida. But we look for anything that can tell the story about the shipwrecks, the things that were found on these Cuban chugs. I'm going to talk about here in a minute. I will get to that. But these small things, and you probably can see, they're insect parts, right? The wings, and there's a little cat here, and of course, this is our cockroach. So they had cockroaches on board, not too surprising, I guess. So we had them. We didn't know exactly which type of insect it was. So I called the United States Department of Agricultural Insect Lab in Gainesville, Florida. And I said, can you identify them? They said, well, we might be able to do a test where if we can get into the cuticle, we look for specific waxes and proteins. We might be able to do something like that with a gas chromatograph. Bring your sample over. So I walked in, I had them in a Ziploc bag. And the guy goes, oh, I thought you were talking about tiny stuff. He goes, well, that's Paraplaneta americana. The American cockroach. Misnamed because it actually originated in Africa, but it was probably brought to the New World by first Spanish explorers and then on slave ships. And so he says, we've actually have some of these growing in the back. And I said, really? And he brought out this big glass jar. And I said, what do you feed them? And he says, dog food. And I said, what's the best way to kill them? He said, step on them. But we're fortunate in that we have things, the bottom portions of these wrecks, that's what survives under the ballast, is it was cut off from oxygen, it was cut off from light, and it's a little cooler down there. And so we have wonderful organic preservation. So things like leather shoe soles from 1559 will survive. All these animal bones, the fossil materials, we've identified cow, pig, sheep, goat, chicken. And then lots of these small bones, which are rat. Okay. And so this is the black rat, Rattus rattus, and so also brought to the New World by our former colonists here. we have that. I wrote an article, and I was about some of the discoveries on the shipwreck, and I mentioned that we had found rats. And so a gentleman by the name of Dr. Philip Armitage, who actually lived at the time in Sanibel Island, Florida. He was an Englishman, but he retired to Florida. He's the foremost rat expert in the world. He's passed away now, but at the time, he was. And so he says, "Could I look at your rats?" And when I found out who he was, I said, "Absolutely." So I boxed them all up and mailed them to Sanibel Island. Then he wrote me back this wonderful report saying, "You have at least 20 rats, you have adult rats, you have baby rats. Your rats were also cannibalistic, so they're eating on each other. And they are also suffering from rickets, lack of vitamin D, hiding down there in the hold. And just like humans, if they didn't get out in the sunshine or have dairy products, they suffered from rickets. But we also had mice on board. This is my favorite. So on one of these ships, we found some small bones like this. And we have a volunteer who helps us identify all the bone fragments. Where are they from? Well, she said this was a dog. So I thought, well, that's really cool. We got a ship's dog, and that's good. But we wanted to confirm it, and so I sent photos and really high detailed photos with scales, and so they could look at them. And I sent it to Auburn University, to the College of Veterinary Medicine. And I said, "Can you tell me about this dog based on this vertebrae?" I said, "Can you tell me maybe what size, what age the dog was, things like that?" And so they examined those, and they came back and said, "It's a cat." "You have a ship's cat." Well, that's even better. A ship's cat. And because other ships have had dogs on before, because dogs are actually better ratters than cats are. Okay. So now we've got this cat, and what can we learn about the cat? Okay. So I took one of these bones and I sent it to Oxford in England, to Paleobarn. And so it's a research group there that extracts DNA, isolates DNA from ancient bones. They were able to pull DNA from our cat and then tell us it matches the same haplogroup as cats that go back to Turkey. And now our cat's actually included in a study that's showing the origins of cats, how they eventually came from Asia and separately out of Egypt, and then into Europe, and then acting as hitchhikers and stowaways to the New World, because cats are not native, these type of cats are not native to the New World. Okay, well then we want to know, okay, is our cat on board to eat mice and rats, or was it a pet? So we did what's called stable isotope analysis. This gives us an idea of the cat's diet. Well, our cat was not eating the rats on board, because we looked at the rats too. We know it was fed a diet of both meat and fish, so we're thinking it was a pet. And cats in the 16th century weren't really well respected, so I think it's really interesting to me, that we find something like this and we can really say that much more about it. I'm hoping we can go a little further and maybe be able to say it was a tabby, because that's the type of cat that it was at this time period, but whether we have a male or female. So that was the manual point 1, and so I worked on it from 1994 to 1998. And then doing survey with students, we found the second manual point shipwreck in 2006. So another 1559 ship from the same fleet. So this is a spoon, handmade from olive wood, personal item. People didn't have forks. Forks hadn't been invented yet. Everybody had a knife, and you had a spoon. And stone cannonballs. And this is kind of like the Swiss, thank you, that's exactly what I was looking for. It's like the Swiss Army knife time, but this is a hygiene tool. And so this is used for cleaning your fingernails, and it's missing one arm. We know it would have another arm fitted in a little spoon for taking your earwax out and everything. It's made out of ivory. And so we were doing cleaning in the lab, and we noticed this little hole here in the side is a reed. It's a whistle. It still whistles too. We found a third ship in 2016. Okay, so I'm going to leave here, Key West, and go back, and then we have a field school with students working on this shipwreck starting on June 4th. And so we'll take it down and do work like this. That's what, it's the floors and buttocks of the ship is the proper ship end. So it's kind of the ribs of the ship. It's all made out of European oak. This one was built in Europe and brought over.
So do you already know from records how many were in the fleet?
We do. We have really good records for that. We used to say there were 11 ships all the time. Then we kept looking at it again and found out there were 12, but one of them was a very small vessel that was towed behind one of the larger ones. 6 of them were destroyed, went down in the bay. We call them shipwrecks. They were actually grounded. They were driven into the shallow water where they shouldn't have been, and they pounded up and down on the sandbars, and they broke apart. The Spanish were able, they'd been in Pensacola for 5 weeks. They were able to come out there and salvage them. So what we're finding are things they couldn't get to. We don't have any cannons, but we do have lots of shot that tells us what type of cannons things were on board. We have some broken barrels. We have, olive jar fragments. Olive jars were these ceramic storage jars, and the food remains. And it's a lot, really, to tell us, the story. And so it's been my career. So I started in 1994, and I am still working on this. I'm still working on things from the first shipwreck, and so it's fun.
And there's 3 more that you haven't located yet?
Correct. Your math is very good. So there's 3 more in the bay, and so this summer, while some of the students will be actually working on this shipwreck, we'll send some others out in a small boat. We use what's known as a magnetometer. It's sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field. We tow it behind the boat. So if you have an anchor or a cannon, something like that, it can slightly distort the Earth's magnetic field right there. We'll pick up what we call an anomaly. We'll dive down, and sometimes it's buried, and so we do circle searches, and we probe in the sand with rods, and if we can hit bounce, then we'll find a shipwreck like that. It takes a lot of patience. And then we have side scan sonar, which sends a sound wave down, reflects back, and will give us a visual image of what's on the bottom. So, yeah, the work's going to continue long after I retire. This is in the Gulf of Mexico, and so occasionally I go out there. That's actually me, left-handed scroll there, but I'm on a big anchor here, working on it, and this is the frames of this ship. So this is way out in the Gulf of Mexico. And this guy here, he's actually protected me, because just out of frame here, there were a bunch of bull sharks. But they were aggressive. They just swam circles around this, but he was kind of my bodyguard. And I've been doing this, for 26 years now. So that was the first time I ever really saw a shark in the water. It's an airplane. And so Pensacola, of course, naval aviation, the birthplace of naval aviation, was in Pensacola. And so we have airplanes, World War II era Bearcats and things like that unfortunately pilots lost control of some of the things out there in the Gulf of Mexico. Oftentimes it's fishermen who knows where these things are. And then they tell us and we go out and look at them. But we've recorded 4 different planes as well. But then what we find, we take back to the lab and we do artifact conservation. And so to try to not restore anything, we stabilize things. So we can analyze it, we can study it, we can preserve it for a long time. We don't try to make it look like it originally did, we just want to make it stable. And so I teach classes in this and have undergraduates and graduate students. We teach them aspects of ship recording. And so all these skills and things, with my help and my students' help in particular, I brought here to work with these Chugs to really come up with an idea, because this history is just as important as all this other history that I'm looking at. You know, that a lot of these things are, you know, showing up still. You know, hundreds of these. You know, but nobody's keeping them. A lot of them are destroyed and all that. And it's important to make a record of these. You know, to show the effort. You know that you know, these hopeful immigrants. You know, trying to make it 90 miles from Cuba to here. What they did to try to make that, you know, attempt. And so to have a collection like this dating from the 80s and 90s, you know, it's really important work to do that reporting. And so I brought, you know, students where we look at these old shipwrecks, but to do the same skills here. And so I came down a year ago. Thanksgiving was my first visit here. And so we walked around, looked at them, and then took a bunch of pictures, but we started recording details. How are they built? You know, even if these vessels are lost at some point in the future, we're going to have them documented how they were built. And the history, I don't have time to go into the whole history of it, but a lot of these in this collection are from the 1980s, 1990s. Many of them are here because of the efforts of Dave Bruce, a local Key West person who found these out, many in the Marquesas, and then had them towed here and took a lot of photographs of them. And so you recognize his efforts, you know, to help this with now the Botanical Tropical Forest and Garden doing this work. So this is used to be one of my students, who's now one of my colleagues. This is Megan Mumford, and so we came down, and then we started really doing all the recording here of this. Megan graduated. She's actually in Vietnam today. So she works for the federal government program to help return American sailors that were lost in primarily the Vietnam War, Vietnam, Cambodia, and things like that, in aircraft in the water. And so she's with the team right now that's doing 2 body recovers off of Vietnam. But these are graduate students from the University of West Florida. And so I said, you guys interested in coming to Key West and helping record it? But the good thing about these students was they were really interested in the work. And so they weren't eager to get away to run down to Duval Street and have fun. We would come back and we stayed in one of these little condominiums not far from here. And then they would take notes here during the day and then carefully record them and redraw things at night. And so make sure the material that we could really utilize it. I tried to, you know, give them cheese and plantain chips to keep them sustained. So it's a group effort, but, you know, quickly looking at the collection, okay. So, you know, this is a little bit of an anomaly. This is kind of a 1960s era fishing boat, but it's great to have this part of the collection because it shows another variety of things, you know, that people utilize to come here. And this is one of Misha's favorites. Okay, and so this one obviously made completely out of wood, and it's showing its age. But you know, that's what it looks like today. It's covered up right now with a tarp, but underneath it on the stern there, you can just make out Mariel. But this is a photograph that I found, I think, from the museum here that was taken several years ago. But you can see how quickly we're losing things. And so now's the time to act. To you know, take this initial survey and that they found money to do and use it to get, you know, other efforts into, you know, preserve these things. And really neat. So this one, going back to it, that's not the original engine of this. This was adapted for this. Most of these things are. They show ingenuity and adaptation. This is a diesel engine that was built in Germany, but somehow it's made its way to Cuba and then readapted for this vessel. And then these are a couple of my favorites. The next two I'm talking about, you know, right out the door here. You know, this is simply rebar with tarp, and then there's styrofoam panels placed in here. And then it's got some other iron strength. This is the engine mount. The engine's not in this one, but to support it. But the flotation, if you look between the blue tarp where it comes up here, there's inner tubes inside there. That's when they were inflated, that was the flotation. They've lost their air now, so it looks kind of saggy. but at the time it would have filled in the space between. It's a real simple rebar framework on this one. But I admire it for, it's a boat shape, but they built a boat, out of things that they could find. And this one's got really neat features. You can start looking close. And so it has this kind of built-in trailer. And so there's one still present today, but on the back of the rebar framework, they had two wheels at one point, there's one today. And then they had a lifting handle at the front so they could pick it up the bow and take it down the beach and put it right into the water quickly. And this one's driven by a prop, but the rudder, of course, is just a panel of steel with rebar framework here. This one is one continuous piece of tarp that's folded into a tube, and then you see where it's been pierced in all the places. After it was placed, they injected foam into this, and they made it basically into this boat-shaped pontoon, basically, but it's all one piece going together. And then they built a bottom out of aluminum panels here. And so I like it, and then it's got galvanized piping as well. And it was powered by an outboard, and so part of the transom for the outboard is falling in here. But back here in the back of these, they built their gas tanks are inside this. And so there's a hose here and a hose here for the gas lines to feed the outboard engine. Pretty clever, just put them inside here. And so, this is a field drawing. And so this is what we'll come out here, we did, and then we'll take and redo these drawings into nicer drawings. And then detail all the notes of things that we observe about these. Okay. So there's a number of these out there. And of course, this is everybody loves this one with the American stylized American flag painting on it. But these are aluminum panels, and then holes were drilled through those. And these are simple nuts and bolts like you'd buy at a hardware store, and they're not uniform. They're different sizes, so they maybe to not be suspicious, they went to several stores and got what they could and put them together. But then they assembled them and then taking, in some cases, epoxy, in some cases, fiberglass and different things like that to basically make them watertight. So I recorded the colors, what they exist. You can take things and visually record what are the colors now. We recorded the thickness of the aluminum panels, what they were made of. We recorded some of the bolt patterns on these things to really document them, so we're going to keep that record. This is when it was found. So you can see, this is time now, but we're getting 30 years on some of these things, 40 maybe on some of them, but it's time to try to protect them and make them last even longer. So there's not a lot of things left inside of them today out here, but we looked around. Of course, we did find things. We looked at them very closely. So these are some of the wrenches, of course, used to tighten these things that they brought with them, and they used when they built them, and used maybe to do where it was leaking on the voyage here. And so we found some of the richest things. I found stuffed up in one. It was a wrapper, and I thought maybe it was somebody, a visitor to the exhibit might have left stuck a candy bar wrapper or something. When we pulled it out, it's actually a wrapper for a Brazilian company that made paintbrush rollers. And it's not in Spanish, it's in Portuguese. And so we figured out what it was and what it said, and it's part of when they built this thing. And then, of course, we look at the details. Nautical terms, we call this a sponson, but it's this extra flotation. They're fire hose type material. They're plastic irrigation pipe pieces or something, and then they fill up with the foam. And then look at how, if they had inboard engines or if they had outboards and how they work their propellers. And then they'll have these things here first and start looking at, okay, is this a drain hole or what is this actually for? Well, this is for the cooling aspect for the diesel engines. And so we have these pipes, and the number of these out here, if you look at them close, they go out and then exits overboard here, and you have a valve here, and this one doesn't have the engine, and I'll show you another one that does. But so trying to figure, okay, how do these things work? Well, they're water cooled, so they took in water from a water pump, so they had a way to get the water in, and they took it, from the area where the propeller area was, it came up, and then they discharge it overboard. Okay, but if you can use that valve, you can actually control the efficiency of that engine by how cool and how warm you allow the engine to run. So, I mean, it's not just simply putting it in, it's putting it in and figuring out the best way to run that engine for this 90-mile voyage. And so I talked to other people, because I don't know all this myself, I had to learn these things. So, here again, you've got the water pump, these different things here, components of it. And primarily, they're all diesel. I thought they'd be gasoline, but they're not. And this one, you can read the word Thermo King. This is out of a Thermo King refrigerated reefer truck. That's where that's from. Okay, it would take about 90 gallons of diesel, 80 to 90 gallons to make the voyage. So some of these still have one little tank, about a 10-gallon plastic tank on there. There were more. They probably went overboard on the way here. And just another clever example of ingenuity, and you may be familiar with this effort, but I love it. So this is a Briggs & Stratton lawnmower engine fixed to the lower unit of an outboard motor, which I think is super clever as well. So the recommendations that I made were to get them off the ground. Misha wants them outside. I'll refer to Misha, but my first thing I said, well, you need them inside. Okay, well, there's reasons for not bringing them outside. They look great out there. It's nice, and I know there's talk about planting plants needing to cube out around them. People can see them. It really fits in, I think, with the garden here as well. Okay, so if you're not going to move them inside, you have to find a building anyways. But let's get them off the ground. So I suggested that some sort of cradles be built for them to get them off the ground. We probably want to make it. We have to modify it a little bit so they can drain if they do get water in them, so they can self-drain. Awnings would be great as well, to protect them from things. And awnings, it takes a little bit of work because you want to think about the proper height so people can still see, but yet it offers protection to the vessels. And then I was trying to find a material that, to keep what's exposed right now as long as possible to protect it from elements. And so I started researching things that might help to do that. And I was challenged because I don't usually work with foam, sprayed insulation foam or styrofoam, big blocks and panels and things like that. So I started talking to companies that make it. BASF, the largest chemical company in the world. They're housed in Germany, is the headquarters. Lapola Industries, they make insulation for industrial uses and home uses and things like that. And then I was recommended this, Clear Coat FP. It's a fluoropolymer, okay? So it's going to protect against UV, and you don't really notice it on there. And they use it for a number of things, particularly outdoor things, to really protect it. It's two parts, and so it has a hardener. So this is going to go on there, and it's a spray application now. For something like this, I think it would be fairly easy then. There's a certain pressure and things like that that could be applied. And it's not that terribly expensive. In the whole scheme of things, it's not that expensive. It's about $126 a gallon, actually. Okay, so somebody's got something?
Why is it not used for marine boats?
I don't know. I don't know what, they use other things as well. I was trying to find something that's specific that might not attack the foam and melt it and different things. And so I was looking at something that might be suitable for all kinds of uses. And so I worked with a chemist at Lapola. They were the most helpful, and this is what their recommendation was. So I wanted to test it. So right now we live on a farm, And we've got lots of stuff laying around. And so aluminum license plates. So we did some cleaning, and then we applied on it to see what it looked like. So I didn't want them looking shiny and glossy and things like that. And so this is after it's been kind of hand cleaned minimally and then treated with it. And I was happy with it. We took wood that's been exposed, because there's some, not the one, the Mariel, that's a little bit too much for this, but some of the other ones, they have almost like frames inside. They're small wood pieces. But then we treated it, iron, and so that's treated, that's untreated. So then we took spray foam, and I couldn't even tell we really put it on there, and so it doesn't seem to affect it. So I was pretty pleased with this. So that was my best recommendation right now.
Is there a plan for reapplication like annually, or how long do you expect it to last?
That's the next plan, is figuring out that plan. It should last for a long time. So when we were here a year ago, we learned that a lot of the things that Dink Bruce collected that were in these vessels were housed in the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum. And so I know Corey Malcolm, who at the time was working at the museum. And so Corey hosted us to come down there. And then he said, yeah, that he could make this available. So one of those grad students, a young man, Matt Kazor, he chose this as his thesis topic. So he's been back to Key West since I've had. He went and he's photographed everything that's in the collection there. And so now he's looking at all of it to go as a comparison study to the actual recording of the vessels. And so he's classified it: health and medicine, tools and weapons, consumables, documents, religious items, clothing, personal items, miscellaneous. What he has. Not all of them do we know which boat they came from. Some of them he did. Dick Bruce left notes, so we can tie it to a specific boat out here. And most of them we don't. But we got a lot. A lot of things for nausea and seasickness. Not surprising. These aren't dangerous drugs. There's nothing in there. But there are things for seasickness and nausea and tablets and other forms, sun cream, different things like that. Tools, some of them homemade, some of them adapted for other purposes. I can't, Matt, think, I don't know that they're weapons rather than more just tools that were used, like knives and things for cutting. Documents, a surprising amount of documents Matt's able to trace back and do things. There's banking account records and things. There's a high school diploma is one of the items that someone brought with them. It was important to them, but, oftentimes when the Chugs land on shore, they just run and things were left behind and such. But he's looking at all the documents, translating all of them, and putting all this together into a thesis, which I think is going to be really neat work. Classifying all the objects that were found. There's children, that were brought here. Some probably didn't make it, some did. Maybe backpacks and all the different things. Food items, kind of potted, kind of like Spam things. Cigarette packs, grocery store bag. Religious items. So why is this important? Because people have looked at the vessels before, and other isolated examples of them before, talk about the Chugs, but no one's really produced anything about what was on board. So that really makes it special. They were disposable, and so it's a likely one-of-a-kind collection again. And so it gives us a better understanding what they considered really important to them and what values and religious beliefs and things they might have had. So that'll be a good study as well. So Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes.
So then,